All right, let's bring in a key player at the time who has a bit of a new job these days. Jason Kenney was the Minister of National Defence in 2015 before the Liberals took power. The new Premier of Alberta joins us from the Alberta Legislature. Premier Kenney, what did you tell Norman's defence that may have helped get these charges stayed?
Well, I don't know if that was whether what I shared resulted in any decision on charges. What I can tell you is that I met with Marie Heinen and Admiral Norman's legal counsel a few months ago in Toronto for a couple of hours. At their request, I was very keen to offer my information and to offer to assist, if necessary, as a defense witness if this matter were to have gone to trial. Basically, what I shared with them, Don, was how I reached out as Minister of National Defense to Vice-Admiral Norman in the spring of 2015 to get his direct and unfiltered input on the Royal Canadian Navy's view on how best to get a replacement supply ship. Because what the story I was getting at the time from the department and from officially from the military hierarchy was that they wanted a 3-year-long procurement process. And I had a hunch that the Navy wanted something much faster than that, because without a supply ship, they can't really function properly. And so I was sitting next to Admiral Norman at a dinner for the Battle of the Atlantic at the National Military Museum in almost exactly 4 years ago this week. And I asked him, I said, Admiral, without just between you and I, what is your view? What does the Navy need? And he said, the Davie Shipyard proposal is the only one that works for us. We need that equipment as quickly as possible. And based on his input, we went with that to cabinet. It was ratified, and it turned out to be successful procurement. It came in under budget and ahead of schedule. So my point in all of this is Admiral Norman was always and only acting for the best interests of the Canadian Navy, and I would be prepared to talk about all of that under oath.
Okay, so help me understand. The choice was to kickstart the retrofit immediately, or perhaps wait 3 years to even start building it from scratch. And this is, as you point out, a supply ship you need pretty urgently all the time.
Yeah, basically what Admiral Norman was asking for when I approached him on behalf of the Navy was effectively a sole source contract. And I know that can be controversial. The bureaucracy wanted to play this by the book and go through what was going to be at least a 30-month procurement process. Now, given how these things slip so frequently in Ottawa, for me, that meant we might have ended up with no Royal Canadian Navy supply capability for upwards of 3 years, which would be ridiculous. One thing I want to be clear about, Don, in this whole affair is I made it absolutely plain to my cabinet and caucus colleagues from Quebec that we would not be choosing the Davie Shipyard based on regional politics, but we would only make the procurement decision based on the immediate needs of the Navy. And so I worked directly with Admiral Norman on this. He always and only told me gave me objective advice that I sought. And the fact that he was subsequently prosecuted for standing by the decision to get a supply ship immediately, to me, is an absolute outrage. And I hope there will be an investigation into how all of this nonsense happened.
Yeah, because Tom Lawson, I believe he was the CDS at that time. He wanted to wait for the 3 years, correct?
That was his advice, the advice of the CDS and the Deputy Minister, for both of whom I have enormous respect, by the way. This is not a personal issue. I think it was the ADM of procurement who persuaded the Deputy Minister and the CDS at the time that they should go through what was, I think, technically a 30-month procurement process. And I just had the hunch that Navy wasn't there. And that's why I reached out to Admiral Norman. But all I can say is the notion that he did anything dishonorable or unethical to me is transparently ridiculous. I think the Prime Minister, the government owes him an apology, and I hope he is restored with the highest possible honor to continue serving Canadians through the Royal Canadian Navy.
I'm still trying to find out, Premier, how on earth there could be a breach of trust if Norman was implementing orders he received from a cabinet. I mean, is that the problem here? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
That's it. It may well be, and that's what I don't understand either. How could this have possibly been? And by the way, the notion that I don't know if he provided information to media or something, but Don, as I've said to top brass in the military, if leaking out of DND was a criminal offense, half the building would be under charges right now. You know that. It's an open secret in Ottawa that DND HQ leaks like a sieve. Not to say that it's right, but the notion that Admiral Norman may have shared some information with media, frankly, that happens every single day at the Department of National Defense. The notion that that should elicit criminal charges is, to me, has been incomprehensible.
Final question on this issue. I mean, the Crown never interviewed you on this. In your view, does that suggest they did a substandard investigation?
Well, I was just puzzling over that just a moment ago. The Defense Council reached out to me because obviously I had material information about this whole transaction, this whole issue, and I'd never heard from the Crown. I would quite happily have cooperated with them as well. It suggests, and from what I'm reading in the media now, it looks like the Crown did little or nothing to talk to people in the then Conservative government about the actual procurement decision, which makes you wonder why they didn't reach out. All I know is I was certainly prepared to testify if this went to trial because I believe the information I have underscores the professionalism with which Vice-Admiral Norman acted.
All right, switching to something you're really keen about in your current job, C-69 is the approval process for energy projects that's getting revamped. Amendments by the dozens are coming forward. Certainly ones that say the environment minister would have to get other cabinet ministers to sign off before they approve any energy super projects. I'm curious, are you getting comfort that you're getting these amendments coming forward, or do you still have a long way to go to get that reconstruction you think needs to be done on this bill?
I haven't been briefed on these amendments, Don. I appreciate efforts by some members of the Senate to correct some of the huge flaws in this bill, but quite frankly, I don't think this goes nearly far enough. I was clear in testifying at the Senate Energy Committee a week ago today that what we need is for them to accept all of the amendments brought forward by the government of Alberta under the previous NDP government to protect provincial jurisdiction on the regulation of production of oil and gas, and we need the full suite of amendments proposed by both the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers and the Pipeline Association. Anything less than that will continue with the investor uncertainty. This is not about splitting the difference politically. It's about restoring investor uncertainty, or certainty, excuse me, and I don't see that happening with this package.
Okay, sounds like things are going slowly in the Senate, so you might not even have a bill to deal with. Jason Kenney, a pleasure having you on. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Don.